James, no time to talk about your podcast because, unfortunately, really bad news for Manchester City today, given how much he impressed in pre-season. Oscar Bobb is out for a substantial amount of time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were predicting he was going to have a very impactful season this year. As you say, he looked very good in pre-season. He's obviously versatile, can play in a number of positions. And you know, City have already sort of said that privately that they're not going to be replacing Julian Alvarez. They've lost another player who potentially was going to play a key role in, for several months. I'm not saying they look short, but certainly they can't really afford to lose many more. There are probably more questions around City in general, I think, going into this season than there have been in the last few years. I think that's just where we are with them at the moment.
Yeah, most definitely. Of course, the charges, Pep Guardiola's future as well. Focusing on the attacking options, this is what they had last year. Obviously, Ali, you take a look at the impact, obviously, Julian Alvarez made, particularly early on in the season, whether injuries to Haaland, and now Oscar Bobb out as well. Even though Bobb didn't contribute as much as Alvarez, he would be expecting to step up a level and game time this season. And it's a big blow, isn't it?
And we're having that expectation because of what we have seen from Oscar Bobb, certainly in this preseason. And let's not forget, there were moments last year and last season in which actually Oscar Bobb scored an important goal here and there. Against Newcastle, for example, where if you go back as to where Manchester City was at that point in the season, they could not afford to lose that game because now things would have sort of gotten out of control in terms of that title race. Look, in terms of what the importance of Oscar Bobb would have been this season, we're all sort of speculating. It's just expectation, and we're just sort of projecting as to what he could have been and would have been. But you can see the trend of a player that has been getting increasingly better, and I think this, as we all sort of feel, this would have been the sort of year in which we see a whole lot more from him. Well, that's not going to be the case. And so then you say, well, what do Manchester City do now? Well, what they do is that if you go back to that list of who scored the goals and who was assisting the goals, a guy like Kevin De Bruyne, who was injured for most of the season last year, you have to believe that that can't happen again. And I think right now Manchester City are betting on that cannot happen again, and that Savinho steps in and actually has an important role for this team. And so while I agree with James that they seem to look short and they seem to look more vulnerable than they have in the past, there's still plenty of talent there for Manchester City, as long as injuries don't hit them hard. If they do, now we have a problem.
Are we overreacting, Stevie?
I don't think so. I think I'm the coach of Man City. I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do if Haaland gets injured? I'm going to have to move Phil Foden up to the top. What about Bernardo Silva if he falls off it? He's getting on. What if he falls off it or gets injured? I'm going to have to move somebody from the left, because they've got plenty of options on the left, to the right-hand side. Now, yes, they still have talent, but that's the difference between winning the Premier League and being second. And we've not spoken in those sort of terms for the last 4 years. Every time we've sat here pre-season, it's Man City are the favourites. Yeah. They've got 2 players for every single position. We've been doing the same for 4 years. We ain't doing that this year. We're saying that there's a possibility they could be vulnerable.
James, 3 weeks until the transfer window closes. Can we see Manchester City going out and spending money to try and get a replacement for Alvarez or Oscar Bobb now?
Well, the noises have been coming out of City quite clear that they're not going to replace Alvarez. And I look, I mean, whether they go into the market now remains to be seen to replace Bobb, but I think there is a bigger picture issue here in that there is, as we were talking about earlier, a lot of uncertainty about Man City now. It's Pep Guardiola's last season, or at least his last season under contract. He's made some positive noises about staying, but there have been mixed messages about that because he was kind of suggesting he was going to go at the end of last season. I've sort of heard on the grapevine there are 1 or 2 members of Guardiola's backroom staff who are sort of thinking maybe it's time to go home. We've been here for 9 years. It will be 10 years next summer. So I'm not suggesting anyone's sort of aggravating to leave, but I think there's a sense that maybe they're coming to the end of their time. And then, of course, there's the other big unknown, which is the charges, the 115 charges. The case is going to be heard next month. It's going to last a couple of months. It's going to probably roll into January in terms of before we know an initial verdict. There'll then be an appeal. There'll then be the outcome of that appeal, and that will run for the whole of the season. And it would not surprise me if, when they've had conversations with players and prospective agents of players that they want to sign, whether they want two key questions answering. One is the manager going to be there next season? And the other is, what league are you going to be playing in next year? Because both of those are uncertain at the moment. And I would suggest, even though they've obviously won 4 in a row, they've been a fantastic team, one of the best we've ever seen in the Premier League, there are question marks that have to be answered by those new signings or potential new signings that make City a bit of a risk to join at the moment. And it may be that rather than compromise, they'll look at Guardiola again and say, look, can you get us out of this? Could you work your magic with the squad you've got? I mean, we're talking about, Stevie's talking there about Haaland getting injured. Of course, they won the league basically without a number 9 before Haaland arrived. So they have found ways of being able to do that. But yeah, of course, if they suffer 2 or 3 injuries, then you do start to wonder whether they can hit anything like the level that they have done in the last few years.